Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1914. Sir Ernest Shackleton and a crew of 27 men are about to embark on what they believe is the last great adventure on Earth, crossing the entire Antarctic continent on foot for the very first time. They had the ambition, they had a tough-as-nails ship, and they had a spirit that they thought was just unbreakable. But, this story isn't actually about the mission they planned.
No, this is a story about what happens when that grand plan completely falls apart. It's a story of total catastrophic failure. And it really forces you to ask a pretty tough question. When everything you've worked for is gone, what do you do next?
You fight. That's what you do. You just endure. For almost 2 full years, these men battled odds that are almost impossible to imagine in the most hostile place on the entire planet. 634 days. I want you to just let that number sink in. This is how they survived. So let's back up. What exactly was this grand mission? Well, we're talking about a time with no GPS, no satellite phones, no way to call for help. Shackleton's big plan was to lead the very first expedition to walk clear across the continent, an absolutely monumental undertaking. And the scale of this plan was just staggering. The idea was to land at a place called Vosel Bay, start a grueling 2,900-kilometer trek across treacherous ice, march right over the South Pole itself, and finally, hopefully, reach the Ross Sea on the other side. It was just completely and utterly audacious.
But here's the thing about Antarctica. It doesn't really care about your plans. Before they even set a single foot on the continent, their entire journey took a disastrous turn. Their ship, the mighty Endurance, sailed into the Weddell Sea, and it never sailed out.
So in January of 1915, the sea ice just closed in around them, trapping the ship like a fly in amber. For months, they were helpless, just sitting there as the immense pressure of the ice began to squeeze the life out of their vessel. You could hear the hull groaning, and then cracking. By October, freezing water was pouring in faster than they could ever hope to pump it out. And on November 21st, their home, their shelter, their only connection to the world was gone, swallowed by the ice. Can you imagine that agonizing wait? For 9 long months, they were stuck on the ship, just watching the ice slowly crush it to pieces. And this was all before their real survival journey had even begun. That's 9 months of hope just slowly bleeding out, turning into dread. With the ship gone, their entire reality changed in an instant. The mission to cross Antarctica, it was over, done. The new mission was way simpler and way harder. Just stay alive. They were now 27 men stranded on a floating chunk of ice in the absolute middle of nowhere. This contrast really says it all, doesn't it? The plan was to be on solid ground, starting a historic trek. The reality? They were on an unstable raft of ice, drifting helplessly, and not even towards land, but further away from it with every passing day. And get this, they would spend another 497 days living on the ice. That number is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Nearly 500 days after their ship went down, that's how long it would be before they felt solid ground under their feet again. And you can just feel the despair setting in. This quote from one of the crewmen, Tom McLeod, it just captures it perfectly. As he stood there watching the Endurance sink, he said what everyone else must have been thinking. This is it. This is the end. We're never going home. So life became this brutal, relentless routine of survival. They had to hunt seals and penguins for food and for fuel. They rationed every last crumb they had. And for drinking water, they'd have to put ice into a small can, hold it tight against their skin, and just wait for their own body heat to melt a few precious sips. So when their ice floe finally broke apart, they managed to get to this desolate, uninhabited rock they called Elephant Island. But they were still completely stranded. Shackleton knew their only hope was this one impossible gamble, a rescue mission that he would have to lead himself. Their target was a whaling station on South Georgia Island. Okay, but how far away was it? A staggering 1,300 kilometers. And they'd have to cross the most violent stretch of ocean on the entire planet to get there. Yeah, to be clear, this wasn't just any old ocean. This meant crossing the Drake Passage. It's a place notorious for hurricane-force winds and waves the size of buildings. Over 800 ships have been lost there. It is, without a doubt, the world's deadliest sea. And they were going to try and cross it in a tiny 22-foot open lifeboat that's barely longer than a big car. Just 6 men in a tiny boat against the absolute fury of the Southern Ocean. I mean, it was a mission that had basically zero chance of success. But after 16 days of just unimaginable hardship, fighting off frostbite, constantly bailing out water, they did it. They miraculously spotted South Georgia. They had survived the unsurvivable. But their ordeal, it was far from over.
Of course, a storm forced them to land on the uninhabited side of the island. The whaling station was on the other side, separated by a range of unmapped, glacier-covered mountains that no human being had ever crossed before. With no real climbing gear, no tents, nothing, Shackleton and 2 others started trekking, literally cutting steps into sheer ice cliffs with a carpenter's adze just to make their way down. After 36 straight hours, they stumbled into the whaling station, looking more like wild men than explorers, but they were alive. They had done the impossible. Again. But Shackleton's first thought wasn't about rest or food. It was about the men he'd left behind. The final chapter of this incredible story was just about to begin. For 128 days, the 22 men left on Elephant Island just waited. They built a makeshift shelter by turning over their 2 remaining lifeboats. They endured freezing temperatures, and they just held on, hoping for a rescue that they had no reason to believe would ever come. So what kept them going? Leadership. Every single morning for over 4 months, Shackleton's second-in-command, a man named Frank Wild, would rally the men with these exact same words. He just refused to let hope die. After 3 failed rescue attempts that were blocked by impassable ice, Shackleton finally broke through on his 4th try. He looked to the shore and he counted the figures he saw there, and they were all there. Every single one. Against all possible odds, after 634 days, he brought all 27 of his men back home. So the expedition failed to cross Antarctica. By its original goal, it was a complete and total disaster. But its true success, its lasting legacy, that was something so much greater. It completely redefined what triumph means. It's not about achieving a goal. It's about valuing human life above everything else. And this really brings us to the central question of this whole incredible saga. What do we value more, the goal itself or the people who strive to achieve it? The story of the Endurance gives a pretty clear answer. It's a story of spectacular failure that became, just maybe, the greatest story of survival and leadership ever told.